The night of my cousin's wedding rehearsal dinner, I stood on the front porch of my aunt's house holding a dish I had spent 4 hours making, listening to the sound of silverware on plates and laughter drifting through the door. My daughter Emma was pressed against my leg, her small fingers wrapped around two of mine, wearing the navy dress we had ironed twice that afternoon because she wanted to look perfect. I knocked again. The door opened 3 inches. My mother's face appeared in the gap. "Oh," she said, not surprised, just "oh." "We got here a little late," I said. The highway was backed up. "Sarah," she said my name the way you say a word you've said too many times. "There's not really room tonight. It's gotten bigger than we expected." Behind her, I could hear my aunt's voice, my uncle's laugh, the specific sound of my brother Marcus making a joke that everyone found funnier than it was. I had driven 90 minutes. Emma had fallen asleep in the car and woken up with her hair pressed flat on one side. "Mom," I said. "It's just tight in there, you understand." And she closed the door. Not slammed. That would have been something I could hold on to. She simply closed it, the way you close a door when you're heading to another room. I stood there for a moment. Emma looked up at me. "Are we going in?" she asked. I looked at the closed door. Through the narrow window beside it, I could see the warm yellow light of the dining room, the edge of a tablecloth, the back of my brother's head. "No, baby," I said. "We're not." I picked up the casserole dish and walked back to the car. The drive home took longer than it should have because I had to pull over twice. Once because I was crying and couldn't see the lane markers. The second time because Emma, who is 8 years old and smarter than most adults I know, reached forward from the back seat and put her hand on my shoulder and said, "It's okay, Mom. We can eat the food ourselves." I sat in a gas station parking lot under a fluorescent light and thought about how I had spent the last 3 years watching my family rearrange itself around my brother Marcus, the way water rearranges itself around a rock. Marcus, who had never held a job longer than 18 months. Marcus, whose rent my parents had paid until he was 31. Marcus, whose fiancée Brittany had been welcomed into the family with a 4-course dinner and a set of my grandmother's china, the same china my mother told me had to stay in the family when I got divorced, and asked if Emma and I could use it for holidays. "My name is Sarah. I'm 32. I'm a nurse. I work 3 12-hour shifts a week, and I raise my daughter, and I pay my own rent, and I have done all of that without asking anyone for anything since I was 24 years old. I say this not because I want a trophy. I say it because what comes later will make no sense without understanding this first. My father's mother, my grandmother Ruth, turned 81 in March. She lives 40 minutes from my parents in the same house she has lived in for 43 years, the house where I used to spend every summer as a child, the house with the wraparound porch and the garden that gets more overgrown every year, now that she can't kneel without pain. Ruth is the kind of woman who notices everything and comments on nothing. She has watched my family for 8 decades, and she keeps her observations behind her eyes like savings in an account she's waiting to withdraw. I called her from the gas station parking lot that night. I didn't mean to. I had meant to call my friend Dana, who would have told me my family was awful, and offered to come over with wine, which was what I needed. But my thumb found Grandma Ruth's name instead and pressed it before I thought about it. She picked up on the second ring. It was almost 9 o'clock. "Sarah," she said. "Hi, Grandma. Apausa, tell me." So I told her. I told her about the door opening 3 inches, about Emma asking if we were going in, about the casserole dish that was still warm in the passenger seat because I hadn't known what else to do with it. I told her about Marcus's rehearsal dinner that I apparently wasn't part of, the dinner my parents had organized and paid for in the private room of a restaurant I'd never been invited to when it was used for my own family events. My grandmother was quiet for a long moment after I finished. "Drive safe getting home," she said. "Make sure Emma eats something." "Okay." And Sarah, her voice was steady and low, "Come to the wedding." I almost didn't. I spent the 2 days between the rehearsal dinner and the wedding, going back and forth in a way that was exhausting even to me. My friend Dana said, "Go. Wear something that makes you feel like yourself, and leave early if you need to." My coworker Janelle said, "Don't go. You owe those people nothing. Protect your energy." Emma, when I asked her opinion because I was apparently asking my 8-year-old for life advice, said she wanted to see the flower girl dress because she'd heard there were going to be real roses. I went. I wore a green dress I had bought the year before for a work event and never had occasion to wear again. I did my own hair and Emma's. We drove to the venue, a renovated barn about 20 minutes outside of town, and I told myself the whole way there that we would stay for the ceremony, have something to eat at the reception, and leave by 8. The ceremony was fine. Marcus looked happy in a way I hadn't seen him look in years, which was the one uncomplicated thing about the whole day. Brittany cried when she said her vows. Emma whispered to me that the flower girl's basket was bigger than she expected, and I pressed my lips together to keep from smiling. It was during the cocktail hour that things shifted. I was standing near the bar with a glass of sparkling water, Emma beside me eating a miniature quiche, when my mother found me. She was wearing a pale blue dress, and the expression she uses when she's about to say something she's already decided is reasonable. "I'm glad you came," she said, which was the most she had said to me since she closed the door. "Of course," I said. "I want you to know the other night wasn't personal." I looked at her. "You closed the door. We had more people than we planned for. It just wasn't the right time." "Mom," I kept my voice quiet because Emma was right there. "You closed the door on your daughter and your granddaughter on the night of a family dinner. That's not a logistics problem." Her expression shifted. Not softened, shifted. "You always make everything so dramatic, Sarah. Marcus and Brittany needed that night to be calm and joyful, and you and I have tension. So you created that tension by closing the door." She opened her mouth, and then closed it, and then walked away. And I stood there with my sparkling water, feeling the particular exhaustion of having said the true thing and had it not matter at all. What happened next is the part I still think about. I felt a hand on my arm, light, papery, certain. My grandmother Ruth had crossed the room without my noticing and was standing beside me in a cream-colored blazer, her silver hair pinned back the way she always wears it for occasions. "Come sit with me," she said. We found 2 chairs near the edge of the tent, a little apart from the main tables. Emma spotted a girl from her school across the room and asked if she could go say hi. And I watched her cross the floor with the easy confidence that 8-year-olds have, and I thought, I need to protect that. Whatever I do in this family, I need to make sure she keeps that. "I want to tell you something," my grandmother said. "Okay." She folded her hands in her lap. She has my father's hands, or he has hers, large, knuckled, deliberate. "I have been watching your family for 30 years, she said. "My son, your father. The way he and your mother have treated you versus Marcus. I noticed it when you were small. I have watched it for a long time." I didn't say anything. There's a way my grandmother speaks that makes you understand interrupting would cost you something. "I am not a woman who interferes," she continued. "I raised my children and I stepped back, and I told myself they were adults making their own decisions. I told myself it wasn't my place." She paused. "The other night you called me from a gas station parking lot with my great-granddaughter in the car because my granddaughter had been turned away from a family dinner. I have been telling myself it isn't my place for 30 years, and I'm 81 years old, and I have decided that was wrong of me." I felt something loosen in my chest in a way that almost hurt. "Grandma, I'm not finished," she said it gently. "Last year I updated my will. I have a house and some savings and a few things of value, and for a long time your father was the primary beneficiary because he is my son. I have been reconsidering that for some time. After the other night I called my attorney." I stared at her. "The house goes to you," she said. "The savings are split, but the larger portion is yours. There are some conditions I'd like you to keep the garden going if you can, and I want Emma to have the writing desk from the guest room when she's old enough, but those are the only conditions." She looked at me directly. "I want you to have a foundation. I want you to have something that is yours, that no one can close a door on." I realized I was gripping the arm of the folding chair so hard my fingers had gone white. "I know you don't need it. That's not the point." Her voice was matter of fact, the way she talks about weather or logistics. "The point is that you deserve it, and I am correcting something that should have been corrected a long time ago." I didn't cry, which surprised me. I felt strangely calm, the way you feel calm after a very long time of being something other than calm. "Does Dad know?" I asked. "He will," she said. And then she smoothed her blazer and looked toward the dance floor where the reception was beginning to move and said, "Now, let's get something to eat. I want to find that granddaughter of mine before she eats all the miniature quiches." I found out later what happened with my father. My grandmother had asked her attorney to send a summary of the changes to my father the morning of the wedding. She did it that way deliberately. She told me later she wanted him to receive the information, have time to sit with it, and make his own choices about how to behave. She wasn't interested in a scene. She was interested in clarity. My father called me 3 days after the wedding. He was not angry exactly, which was not what I expected. He sounded like a man who had been informed of something he couldn't argue with. "Mom told me she updated her will," he said. "I know. I want you to know we've always loved you and Marcus equally." I held the phone and thought about the door closing. I thought about the china that had to stay in the family. I thought about every holiday where Marcus's mistakes were called phases and mine were called patterns. I thought about Emma in the back seat, saying we can eat the food ourselves. "Dad," I said, "I love you, and I think that's something you believe. But I think there's a difference between loving someone equally and treating them equally. And I need you to think about that. He was quiet for a moment. Your mother feels like you've been building a case against this family. I don't have a case, I said. I just have a memory. He didn't have an answer for that. We talked for a few more minutes about nothing in particular and then said goodbye. And when I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and noticed that I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time in relation to my family. Not vindicated, not victorious, just lighter. Like I'd put something down I didn't realize I'd been carrying. Emma found out about the house in the least dramatic way possible, which was that I told her because she is my daughter and she tells me things and I tell her things, and that's how we operate. We were in the kitchen making dinner on a Tuesday night, Emma sitting on the counter watching me chop vegetables. And I said, "Hey, remember Grandma Ruth? The one with the porch swing? Yeah, she's leaving me her house." Emma considered this. "The one with the porch swing," she said again, making sure she had the right house. "That's the one. Can we grow tomatoes?" "I think so." She nodded, satisfied, and picked up a piece of bell pepper from the cutting board. "That's good," she said. "The apartment doesn't have good light for tomatoes." I laughed for the first time in what felt like a week. My grandmother called me the following Sunday. She calls every Sunday. It's a thing we've done for years, a habit that started when I went to college and never stopped. She asked about my shifts, asked about Emma, asked how the green dress had held up at the wedding. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "You can always ask." "Why now? You said you'd been watching for 30 years. What made this?" I stopped. "What made the parking lot the thing?" She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was slower than usual, more deliberate, as if she was selecting each word from a larger collection. "When you called me that night," she said, "you didn't call me angry. You didn't call me to build a case or ask me to take a side. You called me because you didn't know who else to call, and my name was there." A pause. I thought about that for a long time afterward. I thought about what it means that my granddaughter, who has been treated as a second thought by her parents for 32 years, called me for comfort before she called to complain. And I thought about Emma asking if you were going in. I pressed my hand flat on the kitchen counter and kept my voice even. "Children learn the shape of love from the way adults treat each other," she said. I watched the shape of love in this family get lopsided a long time ago, and I waited for someone else to fix it. No one fixed it. That's my fault as much as anyone's. "It's not your fault, Grandma." I didn't say it was my fault. I said it was my fault as much as anyone's. That's different. She had the precise, careful logic of a woman who has thought about language for 81 years. "I'm not punishing your father. I'm not making a statement. I'm just making sure that when I'm gone, at least one person in this family has a place to land." A place to land. I've thought about those 4 words every day since. Marcus called me 2 weeks after the wedding. I hadn't heard from him directly in several months, which was normal for us. We'd grown into the kind of siblings who exist in each other's awareness without quite existing in each other's lives. "Hey," he said. He sounded uncertain, which was not a thing Marcus usually sounded. "Hey, so Grandma told me about the will." I waited. I wanted to say I get it," he said. "I think." A pause. "Dad's pretty upset. But Brittany and I were talking, and she said, I mean, it's not like you don't deserve it. You've been dealing with a lot." It was not a perfect thing to say. It wasn't even close to a perfect thing to say. But it was real. And Marcus, whatever his flaws, tends not to fake things. He's not strategic enough. "Thank you," I said. I also wanted to say the rehearsal dinner thing. Mom made those calls. I didn't know she'd told you not to come until after. He stopped. "I should have called you the next day." I didn't, and I don't really have a good reason for that. I thought about Emma's hand on my shoulder, about the casserole dish going cold in the passenger seat. "I appreciate you saying that," I told him. "Brittany wants to have you guys over for dinner sometime," he said, "if that's something you'd want." I thought about it. "Yeah," I said. "I think that might be something I'd want." We talked for another 10 minutes, not about anything important, and when I hung up, I thought, families are not fixed things. They are not static. They are a series of choices that people make or don't make, day after day. And sometimes someone makes a different choice and the whole shape of the thing shifts slightly. And you're standing in your kitchen on a Tuesday, not entirely sure how you got to a place that looks so different from where you started. My grandmother came to stay with us for a long weekend in October. She slept in Emma's room and Emma slept in my bed, an arrangement Emma found deeply exciting for reasons I did not fully understand. They spent the first morning on my apartment balcony with coffee for my grandmother and hot chocolate for Emma, and I watched them from the kitchen window talking with the particular ease of 2 people who are not trying to be anything other than what they are. Emma showed her the science project she was working on. My grandmother showed Emma how to do a card trick she'd learned when she was 12. They disagreed about whether the movie Emma wanted to watch that night was appropriate for 8-year-olds, and my grandmother's position was that she had seen far worse by 8 and turned out adequately, which made Emma laugh so hard she spilled her hot chocolate. That night, after Emma fell asleep, my grandmother and I sat at the kitchen table with tea, and she told me things about her own life I hadn't known, how she almost didn't marry my grandfather, how she had wanted to go to law school and her own mother told her that wasn't what women from their family did, how she had watched her children make choices she disagreed with, and told herself that love means not interfering, and how she thought now that she might have been confusing love with avoidance. You were not a mistake in this family, she said, eventually, out of a long silence. You were never the problem. I need you to know that clearly. I had been told this before, by therapists and friends and my own internal monologue. But there is a difference between knowing something and hearing it from the right person at the right time. I know, I said, and for the first time in a long time, I think I actually did. There is a photograph on my phone from that weekend. Emma and my grandmother on the balcony, both of them looking at something off to the left, a bird, I think, that had landed on the railing. Emma's hand is pointing and my grandmother's head is tilted and they are both mid-sentence, and neither of them knows I took it. I look at it sometimes when the harder parts of my family feel very close and very loud. I have learned, in the years since that wedding, that the people who are supposed to love you don't always know how. I've learned that this is a fact about them and not a verdict on you. I've learned that sometimes the person who sees you clearly is not the one you expected, and sometimes the inheritance that matters most is not the house, or the savings, or the writing desk. It's the phone call on a Sunday, the card trick at the kitchen table, the 4 words, a place to land, that stay with you long after the person who said them can no longer say them. Emma and I drove out to my grandmother's house last spring, just the 2 of us, to help with the garden. The tomatoes didn't come in the way we hoped. The soil needs work, which my grandmother had been telling the soil for years. But Emma crouched in the dirt for 2 hours, with a hand trowel and a very serious expression. And at the end of the afternoon, she stood up and said, I think next year we should try it differently. I looked at her standing in her grandmother's garden with dirt on her knees and the late afternoon light coming through the trees the way it does in that yard, like it belongs there, like it has always belonged there. Yeah, I said, I think you're right. Some things you don't fix. You just tend to them until they become something else, until the shape of them changes into something you can actually live in. That's the only ending I know how to give you. Not a moment where everything snapped into place. Not a door thrown open with an apology behind it. Just a girl in a garden deciding next year will be different, and a mother standing in the light thinking, yes, it will.